welcome to Overeducated and Underemployed. I appreciate you being here.
That's perfect. I love the title of your show. It works for me.
It's the state of America, I think, at this point.
think so. I think you're right about that.
I'm gonna start with the question that I ask everybody, and that's what's the first song that you remember loving as a kid?
Yeah, my older brother, he's 10 years older than me. He had, as a kid, he would buy these novelty records on 45. And I remember one, maybe like the Flying Purple People Eater, and just these
Yeah.
comedy songs were being some of the first things that I remember as a kid. Although I've also, it's funny because I've had a career as a composer, and I've always been in music has always affected me in a great way. And I remember as a kid, I literally remember being affected by a piece of music that was a theme to a TV show. My parents would watch, TV shows in the evening, and there was a show called Dr. Kildare, which was oh, I can't think of the actor, famous actor played. It was one of those early doctor shows, probably maybe the first one, and it had an amazing theme song. And I can't sing it right now, but I remember as a kid being actually affected by that and feeling like an emotional effect from that music. And throughout my life, music has affected me deeply.
Yeah. That's interesting that it was one thing I was curious about, like, leads to a broader question I had was like how into the type of music that you ended up playing with Al were you before you joined his band, and that's it's interesting. I think I read a story about how Frank Zappa was inadvertently related to you moving out to LA and joining Al's band. And I think it's cool because it came full circle because Genius in France ended up being like my introduction to Frank Zappa's music, and I think for a lot of other people.
Oh,
Anyway,
right. Yeah, that's an interesting story. I had played in cover bands a lot, like we all do when we start playing rock and roll. Some of the bands, some of my first bands we would play covers, but we weren't like a lounge band. We would play really cool covers. And I was playing in a house band situation with Steve J, Al's bass player. And we were playing at this big club. It was probably the best gig you could get in the state. It was a
yeah,
big club, and we would play there 6 nights a week. And it was a lot of times different rock stars would come in there like on their nights off. And Frank Zappa came in one night and really liked the band. He said, "Oh, I think this is like the best cover band I've heard." And it was a nice production because we had a big PA, we had a sound guy and a lighting guy, and it was a nice production. Anyway, he asked for our phone numbers, and he did never called me, but he did call Steve and ask him to audition for his band. So Steve came out to Los Angeles to audition, didn't get the job, but decided to stay in LA and started playing in some bands. And he met some guys who were looking for a guitar player. So he introduced them to me, and I was ready to move. I knew at some point I would have to move to New York or LA. So
yeah.
I said, okay, I'm coming out. And I drove out to LA and became, started working right away. And about a year later, Steve met Al. I think he got hired to play bass on Al's very first album, record deal album. And he was looking for a guitar player. And I got recommended. I did an audition. And I really didn't know much about Al, but I really respected. Once I started learning the songs, I really gained a lot of respect for them because they were very well crafted, even those early ones from way back.
That's very true. And we can get a little bit more into that in a few minutes. I do want to back up a little bit, though. I started to get ahead of
Hmm.
myself. But you knew at a pretty young age that you wanted to be a professional musician. I think I read somewhere like
Yeah.
16 or 17. When did you
Hmm.
start playing music, and where did you go from, okay, I love music, it affects me, to I want to start playing and making music of my own?
I started playing when I was 12. My older brother had a guitar in the closet that he wasn't playing, and I started noodling around on it. So he got me a book and strings and new strings and et cetera, et cetera. And I fell in love with that. It was an acoustic guitar. And then a couple of years later, of course, I wanted to get into electric guitar. A friend of mine loaned me a guitar and an amp, and we played jam together. I didn't really know a lot of musicians, but I had a couple friends from high school I would jam with. But at a certain point, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to be in this band, and they had a paying gig, and I was probably 16, I think, and I said, of course. And I actually played my first paying gig when I was 16, and then I got into another band, and we started working regularly. And I just, by the time I was 17, it was like, I had been in college because I was studying art, visual arts, but the music thing was like, this is a lot more fun, and I'm making money. And so I decided when I was 17 that would be what I would do.
Yeah. Were you playing mostly in cover bands, or were you all playing original music, or a kind of a combination at that
Yeah,
time?
both. Yeah, both. I was in a couple bands where we did a lot of covers, but we would also throw in some originals, even some things I wrote when I was a teenager. And later on, a few years later, I was in some other bands where it was maybe half and half original music and covers. We were playing like cool covers as opposed to Holiday Inn lounge covers. More
Yeah.
Southern rock was big in those days and stuff like that. So we were playing cool covers and originals.
Well,
But the playing covers, of course, learning covers and learning them note for note and everything was a good preparation for working with Al.
yeah. It's interesting to me that Frank said that you and Steve were in the best cover band he'd ever heard, and then I think that's been said about Al's band for years, and something I would agree with, especially on that tour where you played like a different cover every night and really proved you could really.
Yeah.
I mean, you've proved you can play anything over the years, but then you played everything in 1 year, and that was pretty amazing
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. 77 different covers.
Yeah, we got peaches at the show I was at by the presidents of the United States of America. So that was I think the longest tour.
Right.
So did you tour with any of these bands as a teenager, or were you playing mostly like you said you had a house gig with the band that Zappa saw?
Yeah. That was the last band I was in before I moved to LA. Yeah. My earlier bands, we would tour, play shows not far. We would play around Florida and then sometimes up into Georgia and Alabama on some of those bands. But we would just tour regionally. And they would often, because of the kind of band we were playing these sort of rock clubs where you might be there for 2 weeks in one place, playing every night for 2 weeks or something.
Interest.
We'd
Yeah. So
play
I'm
in
curious, like
Cocoa Beach and
how how booking was different. How there's a lot of technological differences for one, but
yeah.
having to navigate and find places is just a very basic thing that I think people think about. But I think booking and promoting and even finding clubs that you can play at in other cities. Is there anything you remember about that was particularly?
Yeah. I think in some of my earliest bands, I think I did all the booking. I don't know why, but I guess nobody else could do it. So I figured it out. But then even in one of my early bands, when I was still a teenager, we actually had a booking agent who would book us into teen centers and stuff like that. But so some of the bands, there would be a booking agent and she would line it up. And other bands, we would just do it on our own. We just hear about a good place to play and we'd call and talk to somebody on the phone, old school. And they would send them, maybe we'd have to send them a demo tape or a pictures or things like that, send them a little promo kit. But it was old school, but it worked. We were always working.
And what was the music you were like listening to at the time, particularly teenage into college? What were some of your favorite bands? Maybe some of the bands you liked to go see, things like that. Was there anything that sticks out?
Well, gee, I did get I did get to see a lot of concerts for a while. Because of my art background, I was doing posters for the local promoter for all the shows. And as a clerk, I would get to go to those shows and be backstage and everything. So I saw all kinds of people, Jeff Beck and Jeff Thrall and just Yes. And all kinds of different bands. For a while there, I was in my later teens, I was getting into, back in the day, prog rock, progressive rock, stuff that was more musically challenging. We in our bands we would sometimes play Allman Brothers songs and blues-based things like that, and that was fun. Musically, um, I started getting into some of these prog English prog bands and things like that because it was musically more challenging and more interesting. We would play some of that kind of stuff, and then some of the later bands we'd play Steely Dan songs and this and that stuff that was musically satisfying. But as you develop your musicality, what you'd like to play stuff that's more challenging. So
For
we managed to still play enough regular stuff to keep booking the shows, but we would throw in cool stuff too.
Yeah, I feel like so many bands now, at least in my area, you go see cover bands and they play like the same songs that people are like singing at karaoke. It's really
Yeah.
you don't ever learn about a new song from a cover band or that.
Yeah. We in my last band, the one at the house band gig, we would learn like 3 songs a week, new songs, and so it kept you fresh all the time.
Yeah, yeah, and it seems like that's something you've continued through the years to like continually want to challenge yourself musically, not just like with Al, but you started putting solo albums out 25 years ago now at this point,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think where do you think the need for an outlet, just a creative outlet? I think there's a lot of musicians, comedians have, and this isn't universally true, but a lot of them have maybe a tumultuous upbringing, or they struggle with like anxiety or depression, or have some kind of internal struggle. Was there anything like that you can think of that was ever a driving force, or was it just a love of music that always drew you in?
It really was just a love of music that drew me in. And of course, once I started playing live shows and got that feeling of being on stage and people enjoying it, and then that, of course, feeds that. But it's always been a love of music. And to this day, even if I wasn't performing, I would still be writing music for the love of it. When I got into my solo music, the Hawaiian Slack key guitar, that was something I got into purely for the love of it. I had started writing my own Slack key guitar songs, and I would record them so I wouldn't forget them. And then at some point, somebody said, "Well, you've got all these songs. Why don't you make a CD?" And I had not even considered that because I didn't consider it to be something that I wanted to do commercially. It was just something I loved. And then another friend of mine, artist friend, offered to do the cover, and all of a sudden I had a CD, and and then I had a CD, some CD release parties, and then all of a sudden I was asked to play at the Slack Heath Festival, and then it just kind of mushroomed from there. But it was all pretty much intentional and unintentional, and it was really based on just for the love of the music.
Can you tell us a little bit about the origins and history of slack key guitar? Because I know it goes back to the 19th century, and
Yeah,
you started going to Hawaii in the 80s. I think you said at one point.
yeah, yeah. I think 1985 is when I first went to Hawaii. Yeah. I think I had heard about slack key guitar. I'd read about maybe an article about Ry Cooder or somebody like that. But slack key is an old style. It's actually older than the blues. It started probably in the 1830s on the Big Island of Hawaii. What had happened was Kamehameha III had brought over. He contracted some Spanish vaqueros, cowboys, Spanish cowboys from what is now California, which was Spanish back then, because they had the knowledge about managing cattle, roping them, and all that stuff. There had been this overpopulation of cattle on the Big Island because one of the early explorers, George Vancouver, thought it would be a good idea to bring 5 head of cattle over and give them to the king. But I think they wanted to establish food, a meat source on the island. But the cows escaped and became feral. And over the years, there was just tons of these huge longhorn cattle all over the islands, and the local people didn't know how to control them. They were scary. when Kamehameha III contracted these Spanish vaqueros to come over, they brought over their ponies and their saddles, and they also had guitars. And at the end of the day, they would play some music around the campfire, and which also helped calm the cattle. The cattle tend to calm down when they hear music, and the Hawaiians were mesmerized. They had never seen a guitar before, and when the vaqueros left, when their contract was up, they left some of the guitars behind, and the Hawaiians, they would have this one instrument. How can we make it sound like a whole band with one instrument? So they would slack some of the strings down to create different tunings, and that way they could play bass and melody and everything at the same time. And all the different families would have their own different tunings, their own sort of family recipe, and it eventually spread to the other islands. And but for many years, it was only ever just played at home. It was back porch music. It wasn't something you would perform, and it wasn't even really officially recorded until the 40s. I think Gabby Painui put out the first slack key commercial record in 1946, and then during the 70s it got rediscovered, and you started seeing slack key albums being produced. But it's got a long history. Like I say, it's probably older than the blues.
That's an incredible story, actually. It's and it is. I gotta say, some of the most calming music I've ever listened to. If you're in like
Yeah,
traffic,
it's yeah.
it is. You're just you turn it. It'll you turn that on and you'll be the most zen guy on the road. I'll tell you.
It's true. Yeah. I do this. I do the same. Sometimes if I'm on the freeway, I'll put on not one of my CDs, but I'll put on some other slack key, and it just calms you right down. Yeah. It's a beautiful, and the music, it's one of those kinds of music that sounds like the place. When you're in a really beautiful part of Hawaii and you hear slack key, that's what sort of drew me into it, was the feeling that it represented the place so well, especially rural Hawaii. And where I was staying out in Hana, Maui, was small town, one gas station and two little stores and lots of horses and cattle and chickens, and very lush. You had a lot of streams and waterfalls and things like that. And that music just really described the place. That's what sort of made me fall in love with it.
Yeah, and you fell so in love with Hawaii that you spend several months a year there, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
Yeah, I as I'm more busy, I spend less time there, but I'm usually over there about 4 times a year, and sometimes to perform, and then sometimes just to relax. So I have a long relationship with Hawaii in general, and I will probably eventually move there full time, back there full time at some point.
And so you moved to LA in the early 80s and you started going to Hawaii in the mid 80s. How much did your personal playing kind of change when you left Tampa and moved to LA and started visiting these other places and hearing these other types of music?
Coming to LA was a great thing because all of a sudden you're around so many fantastic musicians. I remember the first band I was in, we we went out we were rehearsing one day, and we went out to one evening to hear some musicians, and these guys were all like the best players I'd ever heard in my life, and and it was inspiring. It was sort of intimidating as well, but it was inspiring to see the level of musicianship that we had here in LA. And then of course when I went to Hawaii, I the Hawaiian Slack key guitar and Hawaiian music in general was a new discovery for me. And for many years, I'd like to just listen to it. And before I ever tried to really play it, I just like to listen to slack key,
Yeah.
and it gradually just crept into my life.
But you're at this point you're playing with Al as well and you're being challenged to play all kinds of genres of music that I imagine some of it's not even things that you were listening to at the time.
Right.
What was it like to try and emulate some of the guitar sounds that were so precise, and especially stuff that you weren't necessarily a fan of before it being brought into the world that you were playing?
It's always a challenge. It's kind of like being a sonic detective. If we were doing a parody, the job would be to try and recreate it as faithfully as possible. And so that would mean listening to try to sometimes you'd have a song that might have six guitar parts, so you're going through the song bit by bit and trying to figure out what each part is and make notes about the sound. And so it's like a craft. It was something you just learn to do. Later on, as a lot of pop music started having less and less guitar, I started doing some of the programming, the actual keyboard parts and things like that,
Hmm.
because I had a lot of experience with that working as a composer for TV and film, like White and Nerdy and things like that. I would do all those keyboard parts and stuff like that for those kind of tracks. But yeah, it's like being a sonic, like I say, a sonic detective. You're just trying to find these parts. Nowadays, they have AI stuff that actually isolates tracks, which would have been very helpful back in the day.
But I also think like your ability to recreate those sounds live and everything like that has gotten easier for you. Your rig has gotten a lot less complicated when you play live, and you've been able to take it and take it. Not only that, I think the show itself as a whole has really over the years morphed with the technological advances and the ability to incorporate more multimedia.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I work at getting the sounds as close as I can. I don't go overboard, but I try, I use what I have and try and do the best job I can with what I have.
One of my favorite stories is about the Beverly Hillbillies because Mark Knopfler ends up playing on the actual. But I've read that Al say at one point that like Jim's was it sounded more like the original, but because at this point Mark had gotten just so used to playing it freely and it didn't sound quite as. And of course, the Mark Knopfler ones was used, but I think that was just that story always stuck with me as just like a testament of your ability to recreate all these legendary guitar parts. What?
Yeah, Mark was, I think probably from playing it live, like you said, he had probably made some little changes to it, but I tried to get it as close to the record. But you know what? But when I heard that he was available to do it, of course, that was, we all wanted that. That's great to have him
Yeah.
do it. And also, he got the sound more accurate because he had the same guitar and the same amp and all that stuff. He was able to nail the sound better than I was. But yeah, that is a funny story.
So, at what point did you accept that you were part of something that was going to be more than like just a band? In the early '90s, there's the TV show, and the tour gets more and more theatrical. At what point did you realize like this was going to be like something that you were going to be doing for probably a long time?
In the beginning, we none of us thought it would be last more than a few years because it's
Hmm.
a kind of a novelty thing, and we thought if we can get a 3 years or 5 years out of it, we'd be very lucky. But so none of us expected it to have this kind of longevity. But yeah, as the show gets bigger and bigger, also we as a band become more visible and known to people. I was even portrayed by an actor in Al's movie. That was uh, kind of takes it to another level. But yeah, it's like I say, we never expected it to go to have this kind of longevity, and it's been an amazing ride for sure.
And you've talked about how fortunate you are to get to play music for a living. But at the end of the day, it is still a job. Can we talk about some of the monotony of the day to day of like being on the road? What are some of the things that you've done to, the road can kill people, the boredom alone. What are some of the things that you've done over the years to make sure that you've stayed healthy and happy on the road and not let it overtake, your psyche and that sort of thing?
You're right. It's the same thing every day. Hotel room and going to the venue and all that stuff. Now I on previous tours, not this last one, but on a lot of previous tours, I would carry a folding bike with me, and I would take that around. during my free time and explore. Sometimes on days off, I'd rent a car and put it in the trunk and go to a park or a national park or something like that. That was one thing that I did previous tours with the was having this bike with me. Now on this tour, I really missed it because we had a bigger band and we didn't have room on the bus for the bike. So I
Gotcha.
I missed it this time, but I try and get out, and if I have free time, I try and get out and sightsee. If this time I had to just do it on foot, but get out and walk and see the neighborhood or whatever, and do whatever I can. I don't like to really sit in the room and watch TV. Some people do. That's or be on the internet all day.
Hmm.
I like to get out of the room and do things, and so I still do that. It's just not quite as much fun with without the bike.
Yeah. The band has been together for so long. Most bands change members, or maybe someone doesn't take care of themselves and something happens to them, or they can't stay, or they unfortunately pass on. There's been such a longevity to this group that is out of y'all's control, for one. I think just everybody's still with you and able to do it, but what are the things that you guys think were within your control that has kept a band like that together for so long? That's I think there's a lot to be said for that. That's not easy to do.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a level of professionalism amongst us all where we know that we're there to do what Al needs of us, as opposed to inflicting our own take on everything. We're there to support him, and I think this the general consensus is that amongst all the band members. And so just knowing what your job is, first of all, is good, because you could have a player who just wants to change everything up and do everything his own way or whatever, and that could be uncomfortable for Al. And I think having that consistency and that support gives him a nice foundation that he can be very sure of. He's got that consistency that he can rely on every night, and as opposed to things that change up all the time and you could throw you out of your concentration and you forget a lyric or something. But I think that's the main thing, is that we just all agree on that.
Yeah, that is so important. I also I wonder how much of your input goes into the non-parody songs. Do you guys tend to work on your own parts in any way, or is that more of a
Yeah,
you're playing a part that Al has already written?
mostly we come up with our own parts, but he'll give us examples of the kind of vibe he's looking for. He might give us 5 or 10 different song examples of the kind of vibe, and you can key off of those examples sometimes. But then we always have the freedom to come up with our own parts, as long as it's something that he likes. Every once in a while, he'll have an actual melodic thing that line that he wants, and I'll figure out a way to do that and make it. He could have played it on a toy piano, but I'll figure out a way to make it sound right on guitar. But we do have some freedom in on coming up with lines and things like that. So there's definitely some contributions there on the non-parody songs.
And I think those are the best songs in my opinion. And I think the the real fans, and I don't mean the real fans in terms of trying to gatekeep anything, but the fans that listen to more than just the music videos and things like that, the fans that dig a little deeper end up loving those songs more than
Yeah,
any of the parodies for sure.
I agree. Yeah, and that's why why those tours were so successful. The what they call the vanity tours, the stripped down tours, are
I took my
almost
daughter to
all
both of
his
them.
originals. Yeah.
I saw both tours. It was amazing. It was I think it was what the hardcore fans had wanted for years and years. So
Yeah, and it was
first
nice that
thank you
we
for doing that. What were some of your
and it
favorite
was
songs to play on a tour like that, or just over
uh,
the years, the non-parody songs? What are some of your favorites
oh
personally?
gee. I always like rockers, anything that's just rocking. Gee, so many different ones. There were a couple where there were Aerosmithy sounding tunes, and but basically anything that's really rocks was
You Make
what I
Me
would
comes to
gravitate
mind.
to.
You Make Me comes to mind. Is
Yeah,
that kind of a
yeah, yeah.
rocker?
That was a good one. Yeah, you make me. That's a great one. Yeah,
Yeah, I love that song.
Stuck in a closet with Vanna White was always fun.
Yeah, that's a classic. So
Yeah.
y'all weren't expecting the longevity, and I think the roles have changed. How have y'all grown into what it's become over the years? Because I think that's a big part of something that y'all have had control over the years is whenever new challenges for the group came, all stepped up to them. What were some of the tricks to that, and some of the ways that you overcame some challenges there?
Yeah, I've been doing this for so long that I never look at anything as really as a challenge. Obviously, when we're working up a new tour, we have a lot of homework to do, and sometimes it's a bit of a chore. It's like, okay, I've got to research this tune, and then also not only learn all the guitar, learn the music, but learn all the singing parts too.
Mhm.
So I think for me, the biggest challenge is I don't really worry about the music too much. It comes very easily,
Yeah.
but the singing parts are what I have to concentrate, not only in when I'm learning the songs, but when I'm on stage. I never really think much about the playing. I'm always focusing on trying to make sure I'm singing in tune and in the right tone and not forgetting lines and things like that. I really focused on the vocals. So to me, that's the biggest challenge was really just singing. And on those vanity tours, I tended I was the one member of the band that had to do the most backup singing, and a lot of the parts were high, even above Al. Some nights it was quite a challenge, but to keep being able to sing those parts with that intensity, and of course play the guitar behind it.
You mentioned it briefly earlier, but I'd really like to talk about your composition work for film and television and how you got into that, and just
Yeah,
some of the things that you've done over the years on that side of your career.
yeah. I'm not doing as much of that anymore. I went through a period of probably in the late 80s. I've always written music, and I've always written, instrumental music. And at a certain point, probably in the late 80s, I was thinking I'd really maybe like to get into film scoring, because I always listened to the music in films and TV shows and stuff. And sometimes I would play along with the score, a guitar,
Hmm.
just like jam along with what the composer had written. And in the early 90s, I had a friend who worked at a post production facility where they do audio post production, and he told me about this possible gig that was coming up that I had a chance to submit a demo for, and it was for 20th Century Fox. And what had happened was they had licensed a bunch of classic movies from their catalog to China, but they
Yeah.
were going to have to be dubbed into different languages, dubbed into Chinese. But unfortunately, they were missing most of the movies were missing the individual music tracks and the individual sound effects tracks. So whenever somebody spoke, the music and the sound effects would have to be recreated. I had a chance to submit a demo, and it was like a war movie with a bunch of explosions going on. And a couple other people did demos, but they just did their own thing, wrote their own stuff. But I decided I was going to copy the original score note for note, part by part, all by hand, and using sampler keyboards. And they chose me because it crossfaded, it flowed really naturally. It just sounded, you really couldn't tell. So it was a long project of about a year and a half, I think 13 films, and anywhere from 10 minutes to 40 minutes of music per film. And it was a great education. It was like going to film music school because I was studying all the scores from these famous composers. And it was that, and that led to doing a few features for an Asian company, sort of action adventure features. I did music for Honda commercials, and then I did some stuff for the Disney Channel. I did shows a lot of animated Saturday morning animation shows, Iron Man and
Yeah.
My Little Pony was the last one I did, but but and then I got it somehow got into animation. It was just what was where the work was, and uh, it was fun, and I made good money doing it. It's very intense because music is changing every few seconds. But after a while of doing that, a number of years, I put it in my head that I was going to wean myself off of the composing thing and focus more on my original music and my own career. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what I did. So starting around early 2000s, I started doing less of that and then focusing more on my stuff. And
On the
now
slack key, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so now that's what I do. Every so often something will come up or I'll be asked to write something, but I'm not out there looking for that kind of work anymore. But it was fun. I enjoyed doing it, and it was a good living, and I learned a lot. But
That
just better
first
right now to
project
focus on my
sounds
own stuff.
that first project sounds particularly both catered to you and also probably something that helped with your skills over the years recreating other sounds for me, especially as music
Yeah,
changed from just be guitar, but programming things like
yeah,
White Nerdy and things like that. And White Nerdy is actually
yeah,
a good example of some Al's music being a big part of quote unquote nerd culture, if you will. And I
sure.
think nerd culture, it's one, like at this point, like all the biggest movies are comic book movies and Star Wars and,
Yeah.
but how much of that did you relate to over the years? Was that something that you directly like related to as Al was writing these songs?
I mean, not really. I I totally was aware of the culture and obviously his what his fan base was like. I didn't it didn't really concern me. I was really just more focused on the job of getting the guitar parts right and the keyboard parts right, and it was really more about that, more about just the actual mechanics of making the records and playing the parts live and all that stuff.
I will say
Uh,
that is a little bit nerdy, Jim. Just
yeah, you could definitely nerd out on trying to recreate stuff. That's for sure. And over the years, Al, early on, he was not as concerned with the tracks being exactly like the record, but at as the years went on, he became more more into having everything be as close as possible. Basically, the concept is when it comes on the radio, you think it's the other song, and then you go, wait a minute, that's not the right words.
and see, for me, it's the opposite. I'm just constantly disappointed that it's not the Weird Al version whenever I'm hearing songs.
Right? Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've really enjoyed over the last 20 years with your slack key guitar and getting into playing more solo shows? I know at first that was something that was a little bit intimidating for you, but now you've been nominated for several Grammys and won in was it 2021 or 2020 for more guitar stories?
Uh, yeah, 21. Yeah, 2021. Yeah.
I'm I'm assuming you have gained quite a bit of confidence there too. What are some of the highlights for you over the years on that front?
Well, playing at the festivals, the Slack Key festivals, like you said, I when I first started playing Slack Key, I shows. It was when my first album came out. All of a sudden, I had to do shows, and I was playing in Hawaii at things like Borders and Barnes and Noble, and but then I had to play the Maui Slack Key Festival, and there were 1,500 people out there. But at those first shows, I wasn't really used. I was used to playing in bands where there's a singer where that's getting most of the focus. And when I started playing solo Slack Key shows, it was nerve wracking the first couple because I'm the only one and everybody's watching and listening to me. So it was I sweated a lot on those first couple of shows, but I got used to it. And then playing the festivals, those kind of big festivals have always been a highlight. I've also done a tour called International Guitar Night 2 or 3 times, and touring around with three other guitarists from different parts of the world, and a very musical show. Any of those kind of concert experiences now they're all fun.
I I do wonder what it was like returning to Maui to play that Slack Key Festival after you're playing their music back for them essentially. What was that like?
Well, I had been living out in Hana, which is one of the most Hawaiian places in Hawaii, and I had a lot of friends, and I felt pretty comfortable in the culture there, and accepted. And the beautiful thing about, when played my first Slack Key Festival, instead of I think I may have been the only Holly white guy at the festival,
Mhm.
but instead of having any kind of blowback from the other musicians, they were completely the opposite. They were like, "Hey, brah, thanks for mahalo for helping to keep this art form going." And they were ever
Right.
nothing but support, as
Yeah,
opposed
yeah.
to, "Hey, what are you doing playing our music?" No, it was completely the opposite. It was nothing but respect and support, and it always has been.
That's
Um,
amazing. Yeah, that's great. That's great.
yeah, yeah. So that's every so often you'd hear somebody who is thinking it was some kind of cultural appropriation, but it was never from Hawaiian. It would always be from some other white person.
Yeah, I've noticed that happens a lot. There's a
The
lot of that going on.
Hawaiian, because the Hawaiians are, by nature a welcoming people. They, in fact, they don't have any word for foreigner. The word they use is malihini, which means guest. You know, there's no word like with bad connotation for somebody from somewhere else. It's you're a guest. It's
Right.
they're so it's just part of the aloha spirit and Hawaiian nature to be welcoming. So I have always been felt welcome.
I think it's interesting how much a language like linguistically that can like sometimes point out traits about a culture that's really yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's amazing. What do you what did you fall in love with Hawaii? I'm guessing that's one of the reasons, but what are some of the things that made you fall in love with Hawaii in the first place? Other than it just being such a like
Well, I when I went over there, I did actually fall in love with a woman, so that helped. But she was somebody who had a long history with Hawaii, so as opposed to just if I was a tourist visiting, I was immediately going to local luau's and parties, and I was thrown into the deep end of Hawaiian culture. So I was very lucky in that respect. So to this day, I'm still friends with a lot of those families, and it's just a long relationship. But of course, Hawaii is, especially out there where I was staying in Hana, it's the coastline probably looks the same as it did in the 1600s. It's wild, dramatic lava rock cliffs, big waves, waterfalls, a lot of rain in that area. So you get a lot of waterfalls, you get a
yeah,
lot of lush jungle. It's just really an amazing, physically an amazing place.
no
But the
snakes.
culture and the people, no snakes, no, and the culture, the people are. That's the thing. I just fell in love with the culture. Hawaiians are so giving and respectful, and in general, just just nice people. It felt very at home to be there. Felt really nice.
You talked a little bit about your hobbies and things that you do to keep busy on the road, but when you're home, what do you like to do for fun? I suspect get out in nature still quite a bit is something that you enjoy.
Oh. Yeah, occasionally, sometimes take a drive out to Joshua Tree National Park, or there's some local hiking trails I sometimes will drive to. There's nothing right where that nothing really cool that I can walk to, but sometimes I'll just do things like that for exercise. It's a little tougher here because I'm in the city, but when you're in Hawaii, there's a lot more outdoor things you can do and a lot more options. But yeah, I still get out and do things like that, and I like to travel. So traveling is a cool thing. I was down in the Cook Islands last September, which is down near Tahiti, South Pacific, So I like traveling, stuff like that, and of course, just playing around on my guitar and playing in my studio. That's a pretty major part of it.
For sure. What are some of the things that you've got going on right now, career-wise, that you'd like to share with people?
I was involved in 3 or 4 different projects this year that have been submitted to the Grammys. I guess the nominations come out in a couple weeks, but one of them was a project that an Indian project that I played on, and I went to India for that. And I recorded my parts here, but I went to India because we were filming music videos, and that was there were 3 other projects that I was involved in as well, but the one in India was quite dramatic. It's called Sounds of Kumbh, and what it is, it's a tribute to the a thing they call the Maha Kumbh, which is happening in February. That's when I went over, and it's the largest human gathering in the human history. It's like a spiritual pilgrimage,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an area in northern India, and every day there'd be 10 to 20 million people every day,
Wow.
and over 40-day period, there were 550 million people that attended it. A little bit bigger than Coachella,
Yeah.
but it's a spiritual pilgrimage where the poorest of the poor, the richest of the rich, everybody comes. It's loud and chaotic, but it's peaceful. It's nonviolent. So we were there filming because the album is a dedication to this event. So we were
Mm-hmm.
filming a lot of music videos there, and it was quite spectacular. And they created 12 music videos, one video for every song. You can find it on YouTube. It sounds of Kumbha, Kumbha.
There'll be link
But
description of the episode. I'll make sure to link it.
okay, yeah, it's very amazing and very high quality videos. They look like National Geographic specials or something. They're incredible.
Yeah, they really
But
are.
anyway, that was the project that I was most excited about,
What was that
and now I'm
experience
also
like traveling to India?
well, it was I'd never been before, and it was like nothing I've ever seen. I've never seen so many people, and it's like I say, loud and chaotic, but beautiful at the same time. It was really unforgettable.
I really appreciate you being here, Jim. Congratulations on all the success and everything.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
How, where do you see this is this has been going on for so long with Al and everything. Where do you see? Do you know what the next steps are? Do you know what the next thing in the books in the works is? Is there anything you can talk
No,
about yet?
not really. I assume we'll be touring some more. This last tour was quite successful, so yeah, I'm sure they'll do want to do that again. But I'll just keep doing the same thing and doing my own projects and working on more music, and nothing out of the ordinary, all the same kind of stuff. But it's
I
all
really
good.
hope you do tour more. I've seen 10 of those tours over the years.
Oh wow.
And the first one I was 13, and the I'm 39 now, so it's been quite the honestly one of the only like constants I think for a lot of people in entertainment and culture. So thank you so much for everything, Jim. I really
I
appreciate
appreciate
it.
it, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. I'll do it. We'll do it again sometime.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that was my interview with Jim Kimo West. Check out all of the projects he's got. There's still a few of his USB drives with all 12 of his solo records available on his website. There's links in the description. It's been a great year. I'll probably do a little year in review here before the year wraps up, but this is my last interview of the year. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Next year we'll be back with a whole lot more. So stay tuned. I'm gonna do some edits over the holidays, put some compilations of some of the things I've already done together. But there won't be any new interviews until January 7th with Tommy Simbazo, good comedian friend of mine, and our first episode that we actually recorded in virtual reality. So I hope you stay tuned for that. Hope you all have a wonderful holiday. Happy Festivus, everybody.